Hello and welcome to this afternoon's session. I'm Mary Van Buren, President of the Canadian Construction Association and your moderator on cybersecurity. As some of you may know, prior to joining the Canadian Construction Association, I ran Realtor.ca, Canada's most popular real estate website, and certainly that's where I gained a deep appreciation for how serious and how relentless cyber criminals really are. Construction is no different, and certainly we're seeing increasingly it's a target for cyber attacks. And our expert panelists today will maybe scare you a little and also provide some tips to help you and your businesses stay secure. So I'd like to welcome Andrew Loschmann, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Field Effect. We have Julien Turcot, who's the Vice President at GoSecure, and John O'Brien, who's our Head of Digital Security with the Canadian Digital Service. So welcome and thank you for joining me today. So we certainly have a lot to discuss, and we'll get right to it. I was looking at a global study by a research firm, Vanson & Bourne, and they found that 68% of the firms that they surveyed had been victims of cyber attacks in the previous year. So that means, of course, they were unable to prevent and to keep them out. So, is cybercrime growing? And how prepared do you think Canadian businesses are of all sizes to withstand cybercrime? So, Andrew, let's start with you.
I think that that statistic is not at all surprising. What we've seen over the last couple decades in the IT and IT security landscape is that the types of threats that are affecting businesses have changed from traditionally larger nation state type actors who would be attacking governments or very large businesses. And now we see more sophisticated cybercrime activity, which is capable of doing automated targeting, vulnerability identification, and so on. And so the targeting of businesses is relatively indiscriminate in terms of whether it's a large business or a small business. And the impact from that is what we're seeing is that enterprises tend to be, by and large, better prepared to handle cyber threats and deal with cybersecurity issues, whereas small to mid-sized organizations struggle quite a bit more due to resourcing issues or experience. For example, small to mid-sized organizations of any vertical tend not to have dedicated cybersecurity support, or sometimes not even have a dedicated IT person.
Yeah, and that's good to know. So, everyone's got to be prepared. And I know that some firms, smaller firms, are using managed services. Julien, anything around that? Does that help smaller businesses? Are there other things that they could do? Are you seeing it growing as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Managed services is one easy fix. I say easy, well, not always easy, expensive, but it's one of the best way outsourcing, because businesses have something to do. So the line of business is not to be the best cybersecurity analyst, and there's a lot of discipline to be able to be in cybersecurity. So outsourcing is most of the time one of the best choice, I would say. And on top of what Andrew said, I would add that today, people that say, I'm not a target, I'm not a bank, so there's no reason why I would be reached by a hacker. So, well, there's a great analogy that is that for me, but I like to say it. It's like a shark in the ocean. The food for a shark is not human. Although if the shark comes in front of the human bleeding, he will bite him. So being a company exposed, like not fixing the patches and all the basic cybersecurity that should be done, is like being a human in the ocean bleeding before a shark. So it's not that they're looking for you, but if they come to you and see you like the way you are, they will bite, absolutely, for sure. So, and on top of that, hackers are well organized. It's not someone in the basement like we used to say, the script kiddies. Yes, they still exist, but today it's more very organized, let's say, crime hackers, because there's a ticketing system internally. So the first team will go and try to breach the client, and then they will open an internal ticket and feed this to the next team who will try to exploit. And then once that phase is done, it will pass the ticket to the next team who will try to leak the information, and then so forth and so on. So they're very organized. So yeah, it's kind of a new world. Plus all the challenge that we have today, everything is a new way to try to reach and hack in that world. Yeah.
So 2 messages. Don't tempt cyber criminals by making it easy for them. And it sounds like for cyber criminals, it's also kind of a fun game to see who can break through the barriers. John, Andrew talked about the nation-to-nation crime and sort of that's where it started, and now really, it impacts everyone. What does your organization do about that? And are there any things that the government is working on at that level?
Yeah, so I'll step back a bit. I think in my role within the Canadian Digital Service, I don't have that broader remit focus, but my past experience at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, that's really where a lot of this work is being done, and where both myself and Andrew kind of started our careers. So the Cyber Center, they publish a report every year called the National Cyber Threat Assessment, which I would highly recommend everyone read. It goes into really, really kind of broad strokes, but then it dives down into those individual things. And I think the moral of the story for this, for me, is that, and similar to what Julien mentioned, is that if you have something shiny, someone is going to take it from you, right? Like this is the world that we live in. It's just like being in kindergarten. You're in the sandbox. Somebody wants your toy, and if you're not operating from that basic premise, then you're already at a disadvantage. I will mention though that when we talk about things like basic, like patching and the basic cyber hygiene type mechanisms, just because they're simple doesn't mean they're easy to accomplish. And I think that's something that as a security practitioner that we struggle with the language that we use. Like we want it to be easy because it would have such a big effect on the outcome of companies' defensive posture. And yet it's actually really hard to do. And that's one of the things that I've been doing within the Canadian Digital Service, is trying to work with teams in like a more of an agile environment, and getting them to do these basic things when they're not staffed to do it properly, right? So I think working from that mindset is very helpful. Very recently, there's a collaboration, I believe, between the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and ISED, Innovation, Science and Economic Development, called Cyber Secure Canada, which is targeted primarily at small and medium enterprises. But the idea is that it's a limited set of security controls that you can put in place that will kind of raise that bar, make it slightly harder, right? As you know, if we're in the analogy space, right? You don't need to outrun the bear; you just need to outrun your friend, which sounds very bad, but like that is kind of the way of life right now. So I would recommend folks take a look at that first. Start from that. If you can't do the security controls that are there, kind of step back and think about kind of what you're doing in life and how you might effectively more outrun that bear before you start diving into those more in-depth things.
Well, thank you. That was some good practical tips on where to go, and I like that idea of doing the basics and start there, and that should give you a leg up on all the others who are not. And it's a real eat or be eaten theme that we have this today's session. So let's talk about construction. I know some of you do work with construction firms, and I was reading an article in the engineering news record that certainly construction is not immune, and it's on the rise as well. And of course, there are many examples, whether that's sending something to an employee, the employee opens a file, it corrupts their data, or they do denial of service where they can't access information or their own website. So, and in some cases, people just don't want to talk about it and what happened for a variety of reasons. So maybe, Julien, do you want to talk about like what you're seeing in construction, and why are people not wanting to talk about their own experiences?
The thing is, it's not the first instinct to say, hey, we've been breached, but we need to do it. I think it's a matter of trust. If everything's going to come out at one point, so we should be ready for that. And there's not only post-breach exercise, but it should have some pre-breach exercise. So let's say, okay, today we've been breached. What do we do? Where do we start? in terms of communication. All the line of business need to be involved in that because it's going to touch everyone and it's going to affect even client and all the ecosystem of that company. So we need to be ready, and trying to hide that, it's only getting things worse for preventing that to happen.
So it sounds like adding cyber attacks to your business continuity plan could be a good step forward for firms who are already doing business continuity. This should be a big component of it as well. Andrew, anything you want to add about what you're seeing in the industry as a whole and some of the, I guess, the weaker areas where we need to shore up?
Yeah, sure, of course. I think that the construction industry, from what we see, suffers from many of the same challenges as are presented, and as I was mentioning earlier, any other vertical. However, there's a couple of unique things. One trend or one pattern that we note is that among smaller construction firms, there is a predisposition to a sense of I'm not a target. Nobody will be interested in me. All that I have are my books, and they're just on a network, and only a couple of people have access to them. The reality today is, let's rewind 5-10 years. We might have done a full threat assessment on an organization. We might have tried to determine assets of value. The reality is that in 2021, if you have money and use the internet, you're a target. And what's happening is that cyber criminals are no longer performing rote attacks, meaning they're just going along a predictable path. They're taking the time to understand their victims once the network is compromised. And so if you can imagine something that would be painful for you to lose, or a part of your business that would be difficult to operate without access to your equipment, they're going to spend time to take that away from you. And they're going to do that with an aim to focus on money. So whether that's ransomware, extortion, or otherwise, they're going to look at your books. They're going to try to understand how much money you have. They're going to look at where your assets are deployed. And so I would say that on one hand, construction industry members sometimes have a false sense that perhaps there's nothing that a cyber criminal could do to victimize them. And so awareness and acceptance of that reality is sometimes a challenge. The other unique element that comes to mind when we think about construction industry is how the network is built. And so attackers look at their victims through the lens of what they can see electronically or through a remote network view. And what is unique about construction firms is that they often are very operational in nature. And so unlike a traditional small to mid-sized business or even a large business, construction firms will often set up remote outposts with LTE connections and actually have a fairly substantial network footprint, but it's not a traditional one that you would typically see in an office environment. And so from a technical framework perspective, sometimes a little bit more thinking needs to go into protecting and monitoring networks that belong to construction firms.
Thank you, Andrew. So the next question is around procurement. It's the lifeblood of our members. They're bidding on projects, winning projects, and certainly always interested to know what's coming down in terms of requirements from the federal government. So John, maybe you can talk about a bit about that. Are you seeing this as being something where the federal government would like to go? In terms of obviously protecting the assets, but also protecting any linkages into maybe government departments and systems as well. So anything you're seeing in terms of procurement?
Yeah, certainly. So full disclosure, I'm not a procurement specialist by any means, so I might have to wave my hands on a few of these topics, but I did a fair bit of research before I came in so that I could kind of talk to some of those specific questions. Simply put, any supplier that the government of Canada pulls in is a supply chain threat, right? And you could think of that in the parallels to the construction industry. If you're relying on a sub that's bringing in concrete, if they're bringing concrete that doesn't meet your specifications, you're not just going to blindly trust them, right? You're going to do some form of analysis before you go and spend a lot of money pouring something that isn't going to meet your requirements, right? So I think when you look at it from that perspective, really the government is just asking folks to do the same level of rigor that we do on our own systems. And how we do that, it kind of it varies in some cases, depending on whether you're doing kind of physical procurement, so where you're actually going and building a building, say for Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, where like they have very specific needs about top secret challenges. That will be a lot more complex for companies. For most of them, you're looking at relatively low reliability measures. But at the same time, just because the government is only potentially asking for a level at this, like a security level at this point, like to me, it's like, why would you stop, right? So that's typically what I recommend. There's some really good resources. The Office of the Small and Medium Enterprises within the Public Service Procurement Canada, OSME, has some really good websites that they put together in terms of kind of walking suppliers through the procurement process, the types of screening requirements that they might have to go through, whether it be for personnel security or facilities types clearances. So essentially all the information is there. The question then is it presented in a way that is meeting members' needs? And if it isn't, then I would suggest that they raise those concerns with the procurement officials themselves. The thing you have to remember, the government, we want to spend money. We need to find these experts to help us do these things. And if our processes are the thing that are preventing us from delivering on our outcomes, like that's not great, right? So by all means, if it's not working, let someone know. And I would say if you're looking into more of the IT space, the Cybersecure Canada is a really great starting point for that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for that offer to see how we can improve the system together. And I think that's a good message as well, that it's not only to protect your own business, but it's also to be part of the whole procurement process and responsibility to put in that sort of quality IT that's necessary. So there are a lot of criminals out there. They're getting smarter. They're better organized. We haven't even talked about the bots that are also being used in addition to humans to make the jobs even easier to hack. One of the areas that we're going into a lot more is looking at some automation. We're looking at a lot more data now than we had in the past. We had been a fairly traditional way of operating, but we're collecting more data. We're seeing collaboration through things like BIM, where you've got the engineers, you've got the project managers, you've got the subs. Everybody's feeding into one system now. So how does the ecosystem protect itself, realizing that there are firms of all sizes and many different people involved? So Andrew, maybe you want to speak to that, and then I'll ask Julien to follow up.
Absolutely. That's a very large question, and so maybe I'll start at the top with a basic framework that is really helpful to maybe center how we like to think about what it is you're trying to accomplish when you're looking at cybersecurity and implementing a cybersecurity regime. And at the end of the day, what we like to say is that you're seeking to implement what we call cyber situational awareness. And so situational awareness is a term that applies in many different domains, but cyber situational awareness, we say the important thing is 3 steps. You need to know your systems, you need to know the threats to your systems, and then you need to know what to do in response to those threats. And the first part is really one of the most challenging pieces. And I think John, when he was mentioning earlier regarding health and hygiene of networks, and how it's easy to say certain things, but it's often hard to implement them in practice. And so knowing your systems, a big piece is having visibility over your network. What makes up your network? What computers? Do you use cloud resources? Many firms have their email hosted by Microsoft 365 or Google Workspaces these days. Who's using them? Where is your information stored? And what's going on a day-to-day basis. I think a common error that a lot of organizations make is that they assume that simply by deploying a firewall or putting point-in-time controls in place, that everything is covered, when in reality, cybersecurity is a continuous exercise. And to do that, you need to have continuous visibility over the activities of your users, the activities of your computers. And those computers, by the way, more and more can be IoT devices. And certainly in the construction industry, this would be no different. And we're aware of high profile breaches in the US from 5 10 years ago, even where HVAC controls were installed by a contractor, connected up to the wireless network, and were subsequently used by attackers to access credit card numbers and take down some large retailers. So having visibility and understanding what your network is a critical first step. And then being able to build, and Julien was touching on some of the pre-incident activity in terms of preparing for business continuity, understanding what you would do in the event of an incident, who you would call, who has budgetary authority, who's going to be reached out to. Do you have a technical firm that you're going to contact to help do incident response? Do you have cyber insurance? And so on. And so really that's a 1, 2, 3 process, having visibility, knowing what the threats, who's going to target you. By and large, that's going to be cyber criminals today, although many of the larger construction firms could be targeted by nation state type governments, and that's a separate class of cyber threats. And then being able to have a plan for what you're going to do in response to those threats, both on a day-to-day basis, as well as in the event of an incident or a breach.
Just in case our viewers don't know, what is a nation level threat?
Great question. So there are multiple different categories of threat actor, we call them. Julien earlier mentioned script kiddies. So this was a traditional threat. It was basically anybody that could cobble together an exploit, downloaded off the internet, and something to automate that. Then you have cyber criminals. Their objective is to gather money from their victims first and foremost. And so those would be an ecosystem of attackers or actors that specialize in certain activity, whether it's sending out malicious emails or compromising a system. And then nation state actors are those that you would traditionally associate with some of the stuff that you read in the press. So governments that are attacking other governments for industrial espionage, for national security related matters, and so on. And of course, one of the biggest news stories related to nation state actors was even back to the US elections many years ago now, as well as the recent SolarWind breaches that we've read about and some of the supply chain threats there. What is different about a nation state actor is that they tend to be extremely technical and very well resourced. So they're able to accomplish their aims much more effectively than pretty much anybody else out there.
And they're sanctioned. So yeah, thank you for the definition. So Julien, over to you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Andrew. I would maybe add this. We're doing so much penetration test at GoSecure. We see so much of all these, let's say, vulnerabilities and the way we can enter into a network. And most of the time, people say, and that word like, oh, they breached the network. Well, the hacker is not looking for the network, really. It's like saying like the robber is in the lobby of the bank. Well, he didn't steal anything. Yeah, he's in the network. Okay, then. So what we're looking at is crown jewel. So when we speak with the client, we always ask them, what would be the worst thing that the hacker could take from you? And that is exactly what Andrew said. You need to know what you need to protect. Otherwise, you'll be all over the place, spending a lot of money, not at the right place for the good reason. So you need to know what is the most expensive data or information that you have and you want to protect. And then you put the good control around that specifically instead of going everywhere. So I would just add this on top.
Yeah, that's a good point. Every business is, running on their margins, and certainly this for many would be a new area to invest in. And so, you're saying, be smart about your investments. You don't have to put 4 knocks around everything, but certainly around those things that matter most to your business and pay attention to that. So now we're going to talk a bit about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of excitement around that. In the construction industry, for example, we are facing a workforce shortage. So the whole idea of, how can we complement people with artificial intelligence and machine learning to leverage the capacity that we have. And I know there's some reaction to that and what it means. So John, I know you have an opinion on that. Let's go to you first.
I have an opinion on most things. Functionally speaking, the way I usually refer to this is I say no shiny toys until the basics work, right? Like, don't buy the nail gun until you guys know how to use a hammer, right? Which is probably a bad analogy, but like, let's go with it. We use a fair bit of machine learning within the cyber defense branch at CSE, which is great, but it was always designed as a way to kind of increase the effectiveness of the analysts that we had. It was never meant as a tool to replace people, because every time we tried to do that, it didn't work and it just failed badly. One of the things that drives me absolutely insane about kind of the cybersecurity industry as a whole is that we're really good at selling shiny, and throw this money. This will make all your problems go away. And people have been selling those technologies for 27 years now, right? Problems are still here, right? People still click on documents, macro runs, all their files get encrypted and ransomed, right? Like these same problems keep happening, right? So for me, I always go back to these very simple things you can put in place, right? If you're worried about people stealing your employees' credentials to log into, say, your G Suite or your Office 365 accounts, then stop relying on passwords as your kind of final form of defense. Use something like multi-factor authentication, ideally tied to a physical asset. So whether that be kind of a security token that you put in and you tap a button, SMS if you have no other choice, but those types of actions will eliminate an entire class of attack, right? And if you can just like take that whole thing right off the table, then you can focus on something else, right? And when you've done all of those things, you've taken all those bare minimum things off the table, then you can go buy some shiny ML toys. But at that point, you probably won't need them because you'll understand, as Julien and Andrew mentioned, you'll understand where the actual threats are to your business, where you have gaps, and you'll have a very good understanding of what you need to do to address those gaps. And you might come to a point where you say, like, look, like we don't actually have anything else we can spend money on. Let's experiment in the machine learning space. If you get to that point, I'm happy, fill your boots, buy some shiny toys, but get there first.
Andrew, Julien, anything you wanted to add to this topic?
I'm sure we both do. So I'll be brief in case Julien wants to chip in as well. I think that mapping cybersecurity into the real world is often helpful. And if we think about automobiles today, the way that some vendors and some organizations speak around cybersecurity and artificial intelligence or machine learning is akin to suggesting that you could walk out to your local dealership and get a fully automated car tomorrow, and that you should be entirely comfortable getting in it and going around town. Of course, that's not the case, and we're not mature enough technologically or regulatory wise to get there. However, I think for anybody that has a relatively modern car, we've all probably experienced something like collision avoidance technology, which would have some level of machine learning or automated activity encoded within it. And so just as that there's some safety value in including that type of technology in automobiles, there is value in incorporating it in cybersecurity. One of the things that is true, and I'm, by the way, agreeing entirely with what John said about establishing the basics first, but one of the things that is true with respect to network security, and when I say network, I mean computers, mobile devices, on-premise cloud networks, is that there's a lot going on. And so for a human to look at everything that's going on, that is almost impossible. And so you develop strategies for how to identify attacks or threats. And you do that by establishing what is normal for a network and then identifying anomalies. And machine learning can be a great tool in helping build those baselines and identifying those anomalies. I don't know, Julien, if you want to add anything there. Sorry, Mary.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's tons of things that human is not able to see at the same time that would be easier with AI and machine learning. The only thing to take also is it could have two ways. I mean, it could be a very good thing. Or let's think about corrupted AI or evil people using machine learning. So, and you can refer to Terminator or, that kind of movie. So it can have two different ways to be used. But yeah, absolutely. It's still a gray area, let's say, the AI and machine learning, how to use it and what to do with it. There's utility, absolutely, for sure. But basic is the first step to do in cybersecurity. I agree.
So a technology with a lot of promise, but some pitfalls for sure that people need to be aware of. So we haven't really talked about the role of employees within cybersecurity and how often the breach can come in just through this, the employees of different firms. And often people say, well, that's the job of the IT department. Like that has nothing to do with me. So maybe can you talk a bit about, what's management's role and also what's an employee's role? I'll just give another example. I took a SANS course a while ago, so it's the security course, and they talked about how many people use a password like Superman 123, and there's some other common ones, or Facebook 123 and Twitter 123. So the role of employees is obviously critical, management's role. So maybe let's talk a little bit about that. So Julien, what are your thoughts on what are each IT, management, employees' roles?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just so you know, in Quebec City, in Quebec, it's a Soleil 123, which means sun. So the most used password, and we know that for fact because we do all those penetration testing and password brute forcing. So we have that data. Anyway, yes, it's now jobs of everyone to be involved in the cybersecurity. It's not only the burden of IT anymore. It's not. And I think Andrew mentioned it, or John. You ask everyone to click everywhere. I mean, you need to click to download, click for next, click to open an email, click, and then out of a sudden you say, no, don't click here and don't click here. So it's just not normal for a user to stop clicking everywhere because he's been trained to click everywhere for as long as we can remember. So yes, it's job to everyone to be involved in cybersecurity. And I think Andrew mentioned it, cybersecurity awareness, train employees. And just what we're doing today, I think it's one of the best thing we can do. Just talk about it and be one community trying to defend against nation state attack, all the organized crime, and just being together. At GoSecure, we don't see any competition. We don't fight against anyone else than the bad guys. That's it. We align with the one we can and be the best company that we can by being in that community. So I think it's the same thing for company. I mean, it needs to be the job of everyone and not only management. But yeah, we need to open the silos and work together.
I like that it's Soleil 123 in Quebec. I mean, who knows, right? Andrew or John, you want to talk about what's used outside of Quebec as the top password that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I can talk about that. To me, it doesn't matter what the password is because if you have a second factor, then you stop the problem, right? So pick the worst passwords you possibly can. I've got my YubiKey in there. Unless someone comes and physically takes that from me, then I'm fine, right? I think kind of going to that, like sticking just on the password thing, and I think passwords are relevant in the grand scheme of things, but it's a very kind of poignant example. For me, when you think about like an organization's responsibility to its employees, right? Like if you take the parallels of safety in the job site, right? The employer has an obligation, a legal obligation in some sense, to provide an environment where employees can be people and do what they do and not harm themselves, right? And I think that the same applies to the security space. Management's role is to create policies that employees can actually follow and will let them do their job. Right. So the example of password policies is great because, 30 some years ago, some, person decided like mathematically the best way to create a password was to make it very complex, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, characters, and very long. So like, if you do this, you will be secure. I don't know about you, but like I can't remember my phone number most days. So like, that's just not feasible. right? So I think like we have to step back from like these technically perfect solutions and start to think about like how are people going to use the guidance that we're giving them. If they're going to use it wrong, then it's not their fault. It's our fault as security professionals, as organizations that are providing them the tools. So for me, I always talk about essentially avoiding blame, right? If someone's on a job site and they do something wrong, do you want them to hide the fact that they did something wrong that will lead to like further defects down the road and will lead to potentially $1 million of rework? Or do you want them to work in a culture where they can say, you know what, I screwed up, sorry, my bad, we need to fix this right away? If you can get to that space in the security sense, then essentially instead of having one security person or two security people, you have an entire organization of sensors, of human sensors that are just looking for things that look kind of weird, right? And to what Andrew mentioned, right? If there's all this data going by you, the only way you can really detect something is you just get that spidey sense of like, something's not right here, I'm going to tell someone. And as an attacker, as an offensive specialist, that's the worst possible thing that can happen. The SolarWinds breach that Andrew mentioned wasn't detected through any form of like complex analysis. There was just one little detection on, I believe, like an automation, a login event that just piqued someone's interest. They looked into it and they just discovered this whole spider's nest of chaos. So I think for me, it comes back to those simple things: build trust within your organization, give them the tools that let them do what they need to do. Let people be people, essentially.
That's a great example on the passwords, because you're right. I mean, it started out pretty small and easy, and then it was, we went through the phase of, well, now you've got to change it every, 6 times a year, and then it was every month, and then it was every week, and then we started to add more and more complexity to it, to the point where people, of course, were writing down their passwords, and then, so you're right, that whole balance of what is reasonable for a person to do, and then what are the helping tools to help people protect in a way that allows them to go about their day without over complexity. So I like that example, how the pendulum sometimes kind of swings too far one way, and then we have to bring it back to, okay, let's throw that whole idea out and let's start anew. So I think really good points. Andrew, did you want to jump in on this topic?
Sure. I think that what John was saying in terms of ensuring that the culture and operations within your business and within your network are functional. The minute, let me reframe. The relationship between IT and IT security or cybersecurity and employees should be one of symbiosis. And so if individuals within the organization feel alienated or frustrated by the IT security measures in place, you can bet fully that they're going to find creative ways to fix that problem. And I'm always reminded of an incident I was involved in responding to, where the IT team had, for a prolonged period of time, shut down the network and had done a great job of ensuring that only the most essential data was coming in or leaving the network, yet they were still having problems. And when we came on scene, we quickly realized that a couple of the employees, and here's the kicker, out of sheer dedication to the company, had gone out to their local Bell or Rogers store and bought USB LTE sticks to plug into their work computer and re-enable the network so that they continue their workday. However, that allowed the attacker to have continued access into the network. And so that's an acute example, but that's exactly what will happen. Humans are very creative and very smart, and they're going to find ways to solve problems. And hopefully our standards and our approaches and our best practices are evolving to accommodate that. And I think, John, I may be mistaken, but the current recommendations out of the baseline controls is not to force users into constantly updating their passwords anymore, unless you suspect a breach. I don't know if I'm correct there.
Yeah, no, that's in the most recent guidance. It's basically removal of password resets unless there's a breach, the elimination of complexity, and in some cases, the recommendations to use a password manager, which I recommend everyone will use, because let's be honest, like you all reuse passwords, and that is the biggest risk that you face, right? And I think sometimes people they underestimate the risk that we all carry. And the example I always used to give people when people are coming into the organization, or even chatting with my CEO, is that I ask a question like, what would, like, if I just walked up to you and took your laptop away, like how would you feel, right? And because I think some people, like, they can understand this theoretically, but they don't feel it. They don't feel it inside. And I do that once in a while. I'll just take their laptop, and like the sheer panic that sets in when they realize that they've been storing everything on their local desktop, they haven't been backing it up somewhere, is like that seems to be for me the only thing that actually works in some cases, right? The other example I would give people is, like, if you use Gmail or you use Office 365, like if that account just suddenly went away, how would you feel about your life? Probably not very great, right? And then the question then is like, well, do you have MFA enabled on it? If you don't, why? Just why? I don't know any other question to ask other than, why are you not as afraid as I am?
Yeah, some great examples. So speaking of employees and IT and management, COVID-19, a lot of us within a few days found ourselves working from home. Some organizations may be better prepared than others. Any recommendations? We're almost a year into it, but things that people should be looking at even today in terms of a remote workforce. So Andrew, you spoke last, so let's start with you.
In terms of the work from home environment, I think a lot of things remain the same, and some things changed. And the gotcha points for the work from home, I guess, technical environment is that if you think about how attackers target a network, because they are by and large remote, often overseas, they target what it is they can access, and they can access the edge or perimeter of your network. The perimeter of your network in your home, for example, would be where your ISP modem is. So it's the edge device between your home network and the rest of the telco's network. In a business environment, it would be your firewall, or perhaps your VPN software, your VPN hardware devices. And so what happened in the last year was that without awareness that this is how attackers would target, there were an increasing set of threats, vulnerabilities, and exposures related to VPN devices. So the same technology that was used for work from home was correspondingly targeted directly by attackers. So be aware of what changes in your network you've made, and then make sure that you're monitoring and protecting accordingly would be the message there. The second piece that is a bit of a gotcha is that reassess how you would respond to a cybersecurity incident, and identify whether or not the processes you may have already had in place apply. And so an example I like to give is that we had a case where a customer had a work from home user that was VPNing into the corporate environment through their personal device. This was approved, and they were compromised. And so we happened to have been monitoring that device. We identified the compromise. The network operator was able to shut off access remotely to the network. However, the attacker would still have access to that employee's computer. In a normal environment, IT would simply walk down to the user, grab the laptop, and proceed accordingly. In this case, the employee wasn't answering their phone. They weren't responding to email. They were doing other things and were busy. Meanwhile, the system was under active compromise. Now, fortunately, in this case, we were able to, as a security provider, take active actions on their behalf. However, if that had not been in place, what would have been the response on the part of the network operator? So how would you reach out? What are your protocols? And how are you going to handle events and those kinds of scenarios?
Yeah, that's a great and scary example, because we can all be lost, immersed in something else and not realize that something's going on. So that's a great example. John, did your firm, your organization, do anything differently with remote from home, or were you guys all pretty much set up?
So within my specific org, we had already done a few like distributed months. So like we could actually just model this out before this happened. So we were relatively comfortable with it. That being said, like Andrew had mentioned, like there's just some things that you just take for granted, right? So, your laptop stops working, right? You're in Victoria. What do? Well, like unless you have a rapid way to get a new laptop out to you from your IT folks, then you just kind of sit there and twiddle your thumbs, or you kind of move into less secure mechanisms, which is using a personal device or kind of corporate stuff, right? So I think like the biggest thing is to kind of think about how things are deviating from your normal, and just reassess those risks that you might be carrying. I think the other piece that I would probably mention on this is to not always jump on board with the kind of the security panic that people will see, and I think you saw that really early on, when some of the conversations about Zoom and how like it was the end of the world and everything was gonna, right? Like I think like as security professionals, I really kind of like put a bit of a fault on our shoulders, that like we when we talk about things, like the nuances in our heads that we sometimes fail to kind of share with everyone else. So I think it's just my recommendation is to kind of step back from it, look at like the overall risk to your systems, and then just decide if these things are acceptable compromises, right? Andrew talks about the use of VPNs. VPNs are great, except if you have to do anything that has any high bandwidth, right? And then they're not really great anymore, right? You're bringing everything through a single dam, if you will. So then you have to think, okay, well, if I make this choice to force everyone to use this slower piece of internet, what is their likely action going to be, right? And most people will be like, oh, well, I'm just going to do this on my personal device instead, right? And now you have this lack of visibility, which as a security professional is literally like, it keeps me up at night. If I don't know what's going on, like I can't sleep. At least if I know that people are doing something wrong, and I can see it, then I can kind of control, or I can monitor, I can gauge a situation. But the second you force people off of your happy path, that you put yourself in a worse situation, and it ties back to the same idea of the password guidance, right? So just make sure that the decisions you make, you've thought through the unintended consequences, and you have a way to deal with those. Great
points. So we have a question on you've been attacked, and Julien, you talked about before you're even attacked, you should be prepared for an attack, and Andrew, you talked about that as well. So now it's happened. You're happily going about your business, and next thing you know, your computer screen goes blank. Maybe you get a ransom note. Maybe everything starts disappearing or something else. What do you do, Julien? What should someone do?
So if you don't have a plan, let's say, because otherwise you already have a plan for that to happen. And you mentioned ransomware. Just on that note, we used to say in the past, don't pay. Then we said, pay, you need to pay. And today was like, it depends. So there's some website that can help you through ransomware, by the way. It's No More Ransomware, for example. That website is awesome. It's a couple of companies getting together and breaking the code to share with everyone, so that way you can decrypt the data if it's already shared with everyone. So there's just a side note. But other than that, it's I think John said it, you need not to panic first, because I never saw a fireman saying, oh my God, there's a fire. They say, okay, there's a fire, let's do this, and that. So yes, we need to step back and then address the situation. Time is of the essence. I mean, we need not to sit on our hands, but to have a plan is the first thing. And then people most of the time will say, oh, now that we've been breached, we fixed everything, let's do some penetration testing. No, because it's the easiest way to understand where they came from and where they could have get in, although it's not the best way to understand how your network and your organization react when something like that happens. So I would more recommend to do a cybersecurity assessment, a full review of architecture, configuration, and from A to Z, how you defend yourself. And if you have a team, or if you want to go with managed security in the future for avoiding this, or blaming someone else than you because you're doing your business and these guys are doing cybersecurity. So I don't think there's a straight answer to that. I think you just need to at least know what you want to protect, and how you're going to react when that's going to happen. Make sure you're aligned with communication and how you're going to communicate that information if that happened. And all the line of business is aware and aligned with that. So, yeah.
Okay, good points. And I know, again, there are lots of resources out there to help people with their plans, and certainly, firms like yourselves who can offer these services. So, last question: what's your best advice to CEOs to protect their businesses and their people from cyber crime? So, John, start with you. Your best tip.
Sure. So I think for me, it's stop overcomplicating things, right? You already have systems in place to deal with job sites, right? Like learn from that, use that. Don't create different policies that deviate from the things that your folks already know how to do. And I think the second point of that is that like you have to kind of approach this from the belief that like this is going to happen. It's not if, it's when. So if you assume breach, you plan accordingly, and you focus on getting good at responding to unknowns. And once you do that, then you'll just continue to get better over time, right? So any event that happens on the job site, right? You do an after action report. You take those learnings, you build them into your policies, you update your staff, you train your staff, you just keep learning and iterating. You don't need to wait for that, that critical thing to happen. You can kind of plan through some of these scenarios in advance. It's actually quite fun, to be honest, depending on who you have running as like your game master in a sense, and get to that point. And it comes back to like doing those basic simple things. It's like think through what the threat might be, think through what a logical plan is, and then practice it. Right? Like if you have firemen responding to an incident, to fire, and they've never gone through a trial fire, they're going to panic, right? They're like, this is what humans do. People are people. They panic. And the worst thing you could possibly do during any form of crisis is to panic. If you make it worse, it's just all downhill from there. So make sure that you practice how to respond to incidents, so that when you have an incident, like, if nothing else, it will be as good as it could possibly be.
So keep it simple and continuous process improvement. Andrew.
I think my message would be that cybersecurity is not an intractable problem. You can make an investment and make a real difference. And so at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that the head of an organization can do is to accept that some investment in cybersecurity is required and that it will pay dividends. Investment can mean financial cost, yes, and it doesn't have to be exorbitant, by the way. There are very reasonable ways to implement cybersecurity, whether it's managed services or otherwise. But it can also mean time, training, organizational acceptance. At the end of the day, we're talking about preparing for the inevitability of a breach, but all breaches are different in scope. And so if you are prepared and you have invested, you might have a user that has a bad day, clicks a link, gives away their credentials, but because you're monitoring, you notice. And because you've prepared and you have the right technology, the access to data is limited, and you can report to the privacy commissioner, you can report to the regulatory body, you can report to your customers that you identified access, it was minimal, and what the resolution was. Contrast that with not being aware, not having the controls, and then finding out that somebody's been in your network for 4 months, ultimately deciding to do a ransomware, and you're not actually sure what data left your network. So accept and invest, and that it is a problem that you can address and you can make an improvement on.
So we should look at investing in cybersecurity as a return and getting a return on that investment rather than a cost. And that rings true with us because that's what we talk about infrastructure. Infrastructure is an investment that generates 3-to-1 return. So similar to security. So Julien, last word to you.
Yeah, well, maybe I want to add that statistics, 97% of the breach come from phishing. So I would say, and it takes only 1% of your workforce to do all of the damage. So I would say invest in people, and cybersecurity is not a product, it's a journey. So there's nothing that will fix everything. It's a whole bunch of things that needs to be done all together.
Well, thank you so much, panelists. I've learned a lot today. I've got some new vocabulary, things like gotchas. I didn't know that was a technical term, so glad to learn that. And I like the message as well around it's better that we all work together and raise the bar and keep the criminals out, and sharing our best practices and working as a community to protect each other. And in this COVID-19 world, it's similar to the herd immunity, and that's what we need to do as well. And the industry has a safety culture, and so this is part of our safety culture that we need to get better at, is protecting from the cyber crimes. So again, I want to thank you so much, Andrew from Field Effect, Julien with Go Secure, and of course, John with the Canadian Digital Services. Thank you again for your time today.